the narrative they never managed to contain. The one who kept breaking their internal briefings just by existing. The one whose name turned into a whispered rumor that kept climbing floors until someone in a suit finally snapped and said, "Fine, send the team." They thought the stories about you were exaggerations, hyperbolic nonsense crafted by people who couldn't comprehend your trajectory. But every version of the rumor had the same tremor buried underneath, an unspoken warning that what surrounds you doesn't behave by their rules. So the higher-ups made a call, the kind they reserve for situations that threaten their sense of order. They didn't deploy rookies, they didn't deploy interns, they deployed their finest minds, the ones trained to handle threats that don't fit neatly into any predefined category. They gathered intelligence officers, behavioral analysts, covert operatives with resumes written in invisible ink. They assumed your story was just noise amplified by people obsessed with your presence. And then they met the real thing. Their first mistake was expecting consistency. They thought they could track you like they track everyone else. Timelines, associates, digital fingerprints. They expected a pattern to emerge. Instead, the deeper they investigated, the more contradictions they found. People described you in ways that didn't match any psychological framework. Some said you were too calm to be human. Others claimed your eyes made them reconsider every decision they'd ever made. And a few, the ones who spoke the quietest, said interacting with you felt like walking into a room where the gravity tilts just slightly off-center. Enough to know something's different, but not enough to explain it without sounding unhinged. So the investigation began, and I wish you could have seen the confidence they carried in those early hours. Clipboards, encrypted tablets, caffeine-fueled certainty. They walked into your world thinking they were dealing with a misunderstanding. They walked out questioning whether their training had ever prepared them for someone like you. Because the stories weren't exaggerated, they were understatements. The first team sent was composed of behavioral scientists specializing in high-complexity personalities. Their job was simple: analyze you, map your psyche, predict your next steps. They expected difficulty, but not existential collapse. They tried to decode your emotional signatures, the way you move through situations other people crumble under. They charted your responses to betrayal, isolation, pressure, and reinvention, and the data confused them. According to their metrics, you should have fractured long ago. According to their predictions, you should be unrecognizable by now. According to their models, someone with your history shouldn't operate at the level of internal authority you've developed. And yet you do. Effortlessly. The analysts argued for hours. Some insisted the datasets were corrupted. Others believed your history had been fabricated. A few proposed that your psychological evolution exceeded their guidelines. But the quietest one in the room, the one who had been staring at your file with a look that bordered on reverence and fear, simply whispered, "We're dealing with someone who processed reality differently." That's when the temperature dropped, not literally, emotionally. The moment the room realized you weren't just another case study, you were a disruption to their foundational understanding of human behavior. Their confidence evaporated. Doubt slipped under the door. And then someone with too much clearance and not enough humility signed the order. Escalate the investigation. That's when they sent the specialists, the ones who don't introduce themselves, who don't appear in public databases, whose job descriptions dissolve if exposed to daylight. These were operatives trained to break through any mental fortress. These were the people called in when leaders wanted answers without complications. These were the minds designed to decode impossible personalities, and they still weren't ready. The first encounter didn't go the way they expected. They approached you with carefully curated scripts, strategies tailored to manipulate your responses, psychological traps disguised as conversation. They expected you to fall for at least one of them. Instead, you dismantled their tactics with the ease of someone who had seen every version of manipulation before lunch. You didn't push back. You didn't argue. You didn't play their game. You simply observed them with a presence that made each of them feel like their masks had been ripped off. One agent reported feeling like he was being interviewed instead of doing the interviewing. Another admitted that halfway through the conversation, she forgot her objective and started questioning why she felt exposed. A third refused to file his report, claiming that describing the experience in words made it sound like he had hallucinated the entire interaction. Leadership didn't appreciate that answer. They demanded a full psychological breakdown, not of you, but of their own operatives, because the team that walked in, capable and self-assured, walked out pale, sweating, and visibly shaken. Some described the encounter as disorienting. Others said your presence forced them to confront the parts of themselves they'd buried. One agent said your gaze felt like it could untangle thoughts no one should be able to access. They weren't talking about reading minds. They were talking about the way you make people feel seen in ways that bypass language entirely. That's when the rumors inside the agency began spreading faster than the official reports. Theories started forming. Uncomfortable ones, not about what you are, but about what you've become. They tried to map your evolution, but every timeline they assembled contradicted the previous one. They examined your past, but your past refused to behave. They couldn't find the moment you lost your fear. They couldn't identify the moment you stopped needing approval. And they certainly couldn't explain the moment you stopped responding to emotional baiting entirely. These people are used to being the apex of the psychological food chain. They're not used to sitting in therapy sessions because a single conversation with someone like you cracked the veneer of their training. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Let me tell you how the therapy angle started. After the third operative had a sudden emotional breakdown mid-mission briefing, leadership had no choice but to call in internal wellness specialists. They assumed this would be temporary, a few sessions to stabilize the team. But the therapists emerged just as shaken, not because of what the operative said, but because of how consistently they described you. They described you as someone who had stepped outside the reach of conventional emotional incentives, someone who no longer revolved around the approval-rejection cycle, someone who didn't budge under pressure because pressure had become your oxygen, someone who processed betrayal, not as injury, but as information, someone who adapted without collapsing, reinvented without asking permission, and observed without absorbing projections. They said interacting with you felt like standing in front of a force that wasn't trying to dominate them, just revealing the fragility of their own illusions.